Ron is one of my favorites, and I love photography. I watch him when he was working. You could see his mind working. He was going to get the picture that really counted. The impression I get from Ron, it's not just a job for him. It's almost artistry. He wants something that is going to last. Long after I'm gone, long after all the rest of us, when people look at the history books, they're going to look at their photographs. Those photographs are what people remember.
Ron was the hardest working guy at the AP. When I came to work at the AP, he was the mold. Everybody followed how hard Ron worked. He's obviously followed presidents for centuries, you know. No, I'm kidding. Ron's obviously been around and seen all the presidents come and go. He's learned their personalities. He's watched the administrations grow and some of them fall. And he's always been here to record that.
I've had some days where I got up and practically every newspaper in the world had my picture on the front page. And that's pretty awesome.
Do you recall the first time that happened?
Well, probably the assassination attempt of President Reagan was probably the first of that many newspapers, and especially since I was the only one who actually captured the president being shot.
Pulitzer Prize-winning photographer Ron Edmonds, next on Long Story Short.
Long Story Short with Leslie Wilcox is Hawaii's first weekly television program produced and broadcast in high definition.
Aloha mai kako, I'm Leslie Wilcox. Welcome to this edition of Long Story Short. If you had to pick the perfect embodiment of the old saying, being in the right place at the right time, photographer Ron Edmonds would be an excellent choice. His innate sense of being in the perfect position to capture history-making images served him well during his 28-year stint as a wire service photographer for the Associated Press, assigned to the plum but highly competitive White House beat. He covered all presidents from Ronald Reagan to George W. Bush. I've known Ron Edmonds since I was a cub reporter at the old Honolulu Star-Bulletin. Ron had started there in 1972 as a staff photographer, and he became chief photographer by 1977. Little did I know that he would one day win the Pulitzer Prize for his photos of the failed assassination attempt on President Reagan, taken in 1981, on Ron's second day as White House photographer for the Associated Press Global Wire Service.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully
I recently caught up with Ron and his wife, Grace, a former Star-Bulletin reporter, at their home in Annandale, Virginia.
I grew up in California. I was born in Richmond, California, but I spent most of my life in Sacramento, California. And around Northern California, my dad was a construction worker, truck driver, and actually until I was a junior in high school, I never went to the same school more than 1 year. It was kind of did a lot of moving around. My dad had to go where the work was.
How many people in your family?
Had a brother and sister, and my mom and dad.
And at what point did the early glimmer of photography enter your life?
I went to a movie called Blowout. David Hemmings, I think, was the star of the movie back in the And I thought, you know, that's a pretty neat thing, taking those pictures. And I'd worked for the telephone company right out of high school. I'd gone to work for them, and I was working for them nights and going to school in the daytime. And so about a week later, we were choosing classes, and I had a spare moment. I thought, I'm going to take this photography course. And as it turned out, the professor had just started teaching, and his name's Dick Fleming, and he had been a Sacramento Bee photographer for 10 years. And we went to lunch, it was just a fluke, went to lunch, and he told me what he did. And he told me he got to fly on a jet plane, fighter, and I always wanted to be a pilot, but knew I wasn't smart enough to be a pilot at the time. I went home and I worked for about 2 more weeks, and I came into school one day and I said, Dick, I want to become a press photographer. And he said, well, you know, it's hardware. I said, no, I'm 24. I have no responsibilities. I've saved up enough money. I was sharing a room with a friend of mine, and I said, I can probably go 2 years and survive. What do I have to do? And he tried to talk me. I said, no, I'm going to work tonight.
And you'd taken pictures by then. You'd had some early confirmation you had talent.
I had taken pictures, but mostly just family pictures, vacation pictures, you know, scenics and things like that. It bit me, and I said, Dick, no, I want you to tell me what I have to do. So he worked with me. I went to work that night, gave him 2 weeks' notice, quit my job. Fortunately, Dick had 2 friends of his that were still at the Bee, and they had a small freelance business, and they hired me as a darkroom guy, and I started freelancing. And of course, it was the height of the '60s, and the riots were happening. And
well, what was that like when you were putting yourself in harm's way and getting some great images?
Of course, when you're young and stupid, you know, I thought it was adventurous. I mean, I came from a truck driver's family, living my life, and all of a sudden I'm in San Francisco and Berkeley, and people are shooting tear gas, and people are doing this, and you know.
How fun!
Well, at the time it was. I mean, I must admit it was exciting. I went from an everyday mundane life to sirens and people being arrested and taking pictures, and then putting a picture on the wire and having it show up in newspapers around the country.
Ron Edmonds learned early on that a news photographer should always be prepared, and that meant researching your subject, if you could. When did you learn to be prepared? Was that also was that a natural trait, or was that picked up in the course of what you had to do as a photographer?
No, I think it's gained, and as I got better, you know, got more into the photography. What I learned in Hawaii is that the little guy on the street has as much to say about what's going on in this world as the guys in the big offices. And you learn that it's not always the president who is the good story. It's not always the president who comes up with the idea of helping this group in some far-off part of the land. It's one of his aides and people who come to him and say, you know, we found this out, and this is... So, you know, it's trying to treat everybody with the same respect. And I think that gets you everywhere in life, you know. From George Bush treating the gardener at the White House the same way he treated a head of state. No difference. Same amount of respect. And I've always tried to be that way with people. And Hawaii is a great place to learn that.
For Ron Edmonds, Hawaii also turned out to be a great place to find new love and his future wife.
I was fortunate one day to walk into the city room of the Star Bulletin, and I looked across the newsroom, and here was this beautiful young lady sitting there, and I asked the assignment, I said, who's that? And he said, that's the new reporter. And she said, why, do you want to meet her? And I said, yeah. So we went on a story, and I remember the story to this day. It was the winners of the Fire Prevention Poster Week.
A big news day.
A big news day. So we went, and I made these images of all the posters and the winning kids and all this, and next day the paper came out, a story by Grace Feliciano, Star Bulletin photo. No credit. No. So we became good friends, fell madly in love, and close to 40 years now we've been together. We've got a wonderful daughter.
After my conversation with Ron Edmonds, I asked his wife, Grace Feliciano Edmonds, if she could corroborate his story. Do you recall that first meeting?
I remember that exact day because being a clothes lover, I remember what I was wearing, what my hair was. I'd just come from New York City, and I was wearing a China doll look with the bangs and the thing. And I actually noticed him as well. So there you go.
No, he obviously, he was away a lot. He says, yeah, 2 months he'd take off. And even when he wasn't physically away for months, he had long hours and he had dangerous days too. What was that like for you?
You take it in stride. You know, I try not to be a worrywart, although I have to admit the day of the assassination I knew that he was at the scene and I was very worried. And there was no news coming out of it, just that the president had been shot at and shots were fired at random and scattered, and I knew he was always physically close to wherever the president was. So that was a worry, and my heart was, thumping for a couple of hours till I did finally hear from him.
That fateful event occurred during what otherwise was shaping up to be a humdrum day on the White House beat. Ron Edmonds knew the drill. The president would make a speech, exit, and get back into the presidential limousine. Routine. Except Ron Edmonds had disciplined himself never to let his guard down and to prepare for the unexpected. You were assigned to go to Washington Hilton, 1981, a speech. I don't know if it was a particularly important speech, but you were assigned to record images that day. Well, tell us about that day.
Well, it was only my second day on the White House, and but we went in, he spoke, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes maybe, and we almost missed the whole event because at the Hilton we were downstairs, and they always ask people, please stay in your seats till the president and his entourage leaves. Well, as soon as the president walked out, everybody got up. There were 2 flights of escalators to get up to the ground floor where the car was at. Well, by the time we got to the back of the room to go out, because he goes out a secure entrance and we go out a side entrance, the escalators were jammed with people, and we were having to say, excuse us, because he won't wait. As soon as he gets in the car, the motorcade's gone, and you're calling for a taxi cab trying to get you back to the White House. So we're all trying to rush up, and some of the people didn't make it out the door by the time he had walked out. And so, we got up there, and again, it was another departure. And he came, he waved, and I made one image, and the bangs went off. And
when you heard the bangs, did you duck? Did you look to see where they were coming from? What did you do?
Well, I knew there were a hail of gunfire, and I just kept. No, I'm not gonna lie to you. They sounded like firecrackers. It was over so quick, you did not have time to really realize what went on.
So
now,
you would have a reason not to snap anything, right? Because it didn't sound like much.
No, but it sounded. I saw him react. When it popped, it went pop, 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 pop. He shot 6 shots in something like 1.7 seconds. From the first to the last shot, it's only 1.7 seconds. I saw him grimace. So I knew that, this, even if it hadn't been shooting, this was going to be maybe a humorous, what you call a humorous picture of the President of the United States reacting to this bang. Because I saw him, he squeezed his eyes and kind of grimaced like that. And it wasn't, I didn't even know they were shots until the limo pulled away and you could see the people laying on the ground because they were out of my viewfinder. All I could see was the 2 agents through the viewfinder. And again, I thought, even when they pushed him in the car, which is normally what they would do if someone set off firecrackers that close to the president, because they don't have time to decide it's either a firecracker or not. And so it wasn't until the car pulled away, and that's when I went, oh my gosh, because here was Brady laying on the ground and McCarthy, the agent, laying there. And of course, then I knew I was, this is when the adrenaline started pumping. And again, this is one of the situations where I had worked with this crew of agents for many months. And for a while, they allowed me, one of my favorite pictures of the scene that tells the whole story is it's got all 3 of the people wounded laying on the ground and them wrestling with Hinckley in the background. Well, most of the other photographers, even the ones that were coming out late, didn't get that because they got pushed back off to the side by the agents. And I was fortunate enough that I was off to the far side, and for quite a while, the agents who knew me left me out there. The first agent grabbed me and went, oh, just moved me aside, realized who he was moving people out of the way. So I was able to make those images before they once they get organized, then they start making press areas where you have to stand and all that. So those are the little things that help in doing that. And of course, I can't tell you what all that your whole mind gets into the mode of what you have to do. I thought I was in trouble. All the way back to the White House, I was sure I was going to be in big trouble because I knew that I had never seen Hinckley's face. I knew that I had pictures of him wrestling with him, but they had initially pulled his jacket over his head, which is one of the ways you incapacitate someone, pull their jacket up. But the good thing was I got back to the White House. I got a ride from, because the biggest thing that happened to me that day, on my luck side, is that when they pushed the president in the car, the motorcade took off and didn't stop for us. Because if the motorcade had stopped, I would have had to get in that van. That's my job, to stay with the president. I'd have had none of the aftermath, none of the arresting of Hinckley. And I know to this day, I always tell people, thank God that van didn't stop, because I would have had to make that split-second decision. And my job is to stay with the president. You never leave the president.
How much at physical risk did you turn out to have been during the shooting? Well,
I didn't know this till later. Jerry Parr was the lead agent on the thing, and I were pretty good friends. And he showed me some of the diagrams. Unfortunately for myself and the UPI photographer who was standing right next to me, the one bullet that didn't either hit the car or hit anybody out there went across the street, and it went about 2 feet over my head across the street. It was an intense few moments.
At some point, obviously, President Reagan recovered, and you must have had some conversation about what happened and being there together.
When I won the Pulitzer, the president invited me in the Oval Office, and so we had a little 10 or 15-minute meeting, just the two of us and aides. And he was funny. We used to call him Governor, and people would say, "Governor, look this way. Governor, look this way." And he said, "You know, Ron," he says, "I think next time I'm going to have a stand-in for this scene." And then he proceeded to tell me a Cecil B. DeMille joke. But it was very, very nice of the president. He invited me in, talked about it.
And then that was just the beginning of your tenure at the White House. You spent years more covering the president. Tell me the numbers. How many presidents?
Well, I've made pictures of every president since Nixon, Carter, Ford. And then I covered at the White House. I did some photography of Carter in his last month, and then I did Reagan, Bush, Clinton, Bush,
Obama.
Who's your favorite to cover?
George Bush Sr.
Because of his personal manner.
He loved everybody, and he was fun to cover. You know, there's a work and there's a politics, and we don't always get along politicking wise, but he was a very, very, very good person with everybody around him.
While the first President Bush is Ron Edmonds' pick as his favorite president to cover, Mr. Reagan is the one to whom he will forever be linked because of the Pulitzer-winning photo sequence. And the Reagan assassination attempt was not the first or the last time Ron Edmonds found himself in the line of fire. Do you think having these near-death experiences or brushes with...
I think you're making him a little more than... I mean, I've been shot at, and...
Do you think it changed how you look at things?
Oh, not really. Part of when you get into this, you're a little gutsy. I mean, I've always enjoyed doing things that are a little... Most good photographers have a certain amount of adrenaline rush that they get from what they do.
You got that wild gene.
From surfing to I raced cars and all kinds of things like that. And so I don't want to say that it changed me. The first time I was ever in gunfire was during the riots in the early '60s in Berkeley and People's Park. And the first time you're around someone shooting and you realize that you can get hit with it. A lot of times you're around those situations, but you kind of stand off, and we all kind of have that feeling it's not us.
Right,
we're
it's
kind
a
of
denial.
An observer, we're around it. And it wasn't until I was in Iran for a short stint, and it wasn't until we were coming on artillery fire. And that changed the whole world as what you think about being a bang-bang photographer for me. I mean, bullet, you kind of think, well, that's something that it's got to hit me. Artillery coming in is so indiscriminate, and there is nothing you can do. I mean, there's literally nothing you can do. If it's coming in, it's either going to hit you or it's not going to hit you. And if it hits near you, you're gone.
Whether on the battlefield of a war-torn country or in the politically charged environment of the power centers of Washington, D.C., Ron Edmonds made sure he knew what to look for.
people think, well, gee, you just take pictures. It must be nice just to show up and take pictures. Most people don't realize if you're going to do it well, the night before, I'm looking at pictures that, before the internet, we would have picture books and stuff that we would take along so you know who the people were. When he's meeting with foreign leaders, you read the wire before you left in the morning to see if, well, is this senator or is this head of state, is there something that we should be looking for?
You're looking for reaction shots, aren't you?
Reaction.
Right?
And
who should I go to?
Sometimes, it's like going in the Oval Office. I always tell people the hardest time for me career-wise is that split second when they open the door to the Oval Office on a huge story, because in that split second, you open your eyes, and the AP, fortunately, the AP is always, because they're the largest wire service, the first one through the door, and sometimes there's 30 or 40 people that have to go in the Oval Office, which is not very big. That includes camera crews, still photographers, and when that door opens up, in an instant, you have to eyeball who's in there, because many times it's not the person sitting talking to the president that's the story. It might be during political season. For instance, one of the big events, Karl Rove, who was George Bush's kind of image guy, was in trouble. I can't remember what it was, but he was controversy, and he's standing back over the window. We hadn't seen him in 3 days. I spotted him going in the door and made a pretty decent picture. Got a lot of play. It wasn't huge, but it got a lot of play, where the other two guys that were with me didn't notice him. They were only in there for, on average, not more than 30 seconds is all you're in unless he speaks.
Always on the cutting edge, Ron Edmonds would help lead the White House press corps' transition to digital photography.
One of the biggest jumps came when President Bush 41's inauguration, Nikon had a new experimental camera. Here's the big picture of the inauguration, and I'm shooting with this experimental camera. We beat everybody on the wire 30 minutes with the first picture.
Well, we'd like to image on the wire in under 10 minutes, preferably 5, from the time the event started. Not stopped, started. So sometimes when you go into an event, if you're traveling with the president, say in town or even out of town, and you go to maybe speaking to the 4-H Club of America, if we know we're on critical deadlines, we know that, okay, as soon as I have something that I think is usable and will illustrate what the president was doing, as soon as I've got that, I take the disc out, I've got a little laptop on my backpack, I grab it out, and hope you can get a Wi-Fi signal, and you move the picture. So, and while you're doing that, you're sitting there watching the president to make sure nothing happens.
By the time Ron Edmonds retired in 2009, he had earned the title of Senior White House Photographer for the Associated Press. Looking back, he realizes what an amazing career he's had.
I covered volcanoes, Mount St. Helens, I covered the war, I've covered the Olympics, I've covered the Summer Olympics, the Winter Olympics. I've been to I've covered almost every convention since 1980, and I've got to see things that most people will never see in their life. Traveling down the Nile River with the President of the United States, chatting with you. One morning, 8 o'clock in the morning, the phone rings, and Grace answers the phone, and she wakes me up and says, "It's the White House calling." I said, "What, the White House?" She says, "Yeah." The guy on the other end says, "It's the White House." So I answered, it was his aide saying, "What are you doing today?" I said, "Nothing." He said, "The President would like you to come over and play horseshoes." So I went and spent the Sunday. It was like going to your grandmother's house. We barbecued, we played horseshoes. How many people get to do that? I mean, from the son of a poor truck driver, and here I am sitting having a drink with the President of the United States. That's a pretty good career. Part of my job as a photojournalist is to explain to people who can't see it. I was able to be the eyes of millions of people. I mean, there are not many people around who have had as many images looked at as me. I worked for the Associated Press, and on any given day, my picture could be on the front of 2,000 newspapers around the country, as well as television stations. Pretty good career.
Now in retirement, Ron Edmonds enjoys traveling with his wife Grace and indulging his love of bass fishing. He embraces this different life with no deadlines. Mahalo to Ron Edmonds of Fairfax.
Most of us do that kind of thing because you want to change it. Most of the guys, if people think that the photographers are getting rich covering the war, it's just not happening. Most of them are concerned about what's going on in the world, and if they're not there, things can happen that will never be seen by most public.